You'll have to excuse my appearance today. I don't feel that great. But I wanted to read, so. Chapter 1. Jane hid behind one of the large SUVs that had been stolen at a roadblock and was now being used to either transport drugs or young women. Her mouth tightened into a grim line. The men were nothing but rapists, using the women as sex slaves. They sickened Jane. The thought of her sister being married to one made her want to shake Begley the minute she managed to find her. As she waited for the bus, her thoughts went back to how she had managed to get herself into a predicament that rivaled the night Sex Pistols' beauty shop had been robbed. At least that fiasco had been over in a matter of hours. This harebrained scheme of hers seemed to be lasting forever. When Begley had told them she was going to Peñuela, I have no idea how to say that. She had tossed her parents and Jane's warnings away, as if they hadn't known what they were talking about. Now she was trapped, and Jane had foolishly sneaked in to attempt a rescue. Hold on. Mop is driving me nuts. That's why I usually wear it up. It hadn't taken her long to regret her impetuous decision to try to save her sister. If she hadn't managed to catch a few lucky breaks, she would have already returned to her small apartment in the safety of the town her father lived in. About a week before, she entered Mexico and managed to latch on to John and Sandra Terrell, who were trying to get their son back. The son had come down on vacation and never returned. Instead, the parents had received a call demanding a ransom. John was ex-military and was attempting to go into Mexico to save their son. Jane met them at the hotel where she was staying and joined them during dinner. When they found out why she was going to Mexico, they quickly tried to dissuade her. Seeing that she wasn't going to give up, they attempted to help her by John including her in his plans. It was dangerous, but it just might work. At least it was better than what she had planned. Heading straight to Peñuela, I'm going to struggle with this word, and demanding to see Begley. Sandra remained behind, giving Jane the chance to enter Mexico unnoticed. Oh my God. Jane and John... Get it together, woman. Jane and John crossed the border with her pretending to be his wife. The guards didn't even blink at the identification she had presented to them after she slipped them a handful of cash to ignore the lack of similarities between her and the picture. Once across the border, they were staying in the same hotel John's son had used when they were dragged out of their room in the middle of the night. John was taken away in a heavily armed jeep, while Jane was escorted to a small house that contained several other women. Goodness. Oh, excuse me. Where was I? The 3 days she was forced to spend there were horrifying. She repeatedly witnessed women being dragged out of there after men came in and surveyed them. She was about to lose hope when the door was thrust open and John appeared in the doorway. She quickly stood, moving toward him and remaining silent as fear screamed through her veins. After she followed John to the same jeep they had left in 3 days ago, they climbed in and took off. Inside the jeep, a man dressed in military fatigues was driving while another stood in the rear with a rifle. John sat on the front seat next to the driver, and a tanned man she knew to be John's son from the many pictures Sandra had shown her sat next to her. They were heading back to the border, and while her nerves were relieved to be going home, her anxiety rose as she realized she was leaving her sister behind. After they left the city, John reached for a canteen of water, handing it to her in the back seat. She took a long drink of the warm water, then offered it to John's son, only to receive a shake of his head. When she reached forward to hand it back to John, he took it and smashed it down on the head of the driver. The Jeep lost control as the driver spun out, trying to hang on to the steering wheel. John was attempting to wrench from his control. Jane clung to the seat in front of her for dear life, terrified she would be thrown out. As the fighter behind her loosened his hold on the Jeep, bringing his weapon up to fire, Jane saw John's son reach back and push the guard out of the back of the careening vehicle. Just as the yell sounded from the falling man, the driver managed to bring the Jeep to a stop and then fought with John in the front seat. Jane watched as John's son leaned forward, putting the fighter in a chokehold from behind until he stopped moving. "John!" Jane screamed, seeing the man who had fallen out of the back running toward them. John reached over to the opposite side of the driver, pulling his weapon free. With one smooth move, he twisted in his seat, bringing the pistol up. John aimed to miss his son and fired. Several pops came from the pistol, and the fighter fell to the ground. Everyone sat frozen for several seconds before John and his son jumped from their seats. "Hurry, Jane, we don't have long." The men pulled the dead driver from his seat, taking off his clothes. Jane couldn't understand what they were doing. "Get your clothes off. I'll stash them in my backpack," John ordered. The urgency John showed didn't give her time to feel shy about disrobing in front of the men. Taking off her clothes, she threw them aside before pulling the khaki trousers up her hips. They were long on her, yet not too bad. Her fingers trembled so badly she barely managed to lace up the boots before they threw toward the pile of clothes laying on the ground. Grabbing the large shirt, she quickly buttoned it closed. The last part was the cap, which she clumsily put on. "Try to hide your face as much as possible," John said, studying her critically. John's son went to the dead guard lying on the ground next to the one John had shot. He picked up the gun and handed it to Jane along with the canteen. "Do you know how to shoot?" "No," she said, holding it cautiously. John took it from her, giving her a series of instructions she knew she wouldn't be able to remember. "I tried to find out what I could about your sister. As far as I could piece together, you might still be able to find her in Penuela. This is as far as Matthew and I can go, though. We're getting our asses out of here. Do you want to come with us?" He handed her the backpack he had stuffed her clothes into. "I have to try," Jane said softly. She was unbelievably scared. She wanted to cling to the safety of the two men, but she couldn't leave without Bailey. If John had been successful, maybe she stood a chance as well. "I can't leave the Jeep. Besides, you'll have an easier time passing unnoticed if you try to fit in. Not too many will try to confront you in the clothes you're wearing," John said apologetically. Hold on. Oh, goodness. "I understand." Matthew climbed into the Jeep. "Dad, we have to go before someone comes along and finds us." "Good luck." With that, John climbed into the vehicle without a backward glance. "You too." The two men didn't hear her response as they took off, leaving her alone in a cloud of dust. She took buses during the day, ignoring the wary looks others gave her. Finding somewhere to hide that night, her luck held out. No one recognized her as a woman. The next morning, she put dirt on her face and hands to disguise her features, and thanks to the many hours she had spent in Spanish class, she was able to pass through several cities without trouble. She also found a spot to bury the clothes that would identify her as a woman. If anyone decided to search the backpack she carried, the only thing they would find was an innocuous tube of medicine and some meal replacement bars. Thankfully, the research to get prepared for finding her sister had clued her in on where to stay away from in her journey to Penuela. Jane had heard that several areas in Mexico were dangerous, but she had no clue as to just how much until she was sitting at a small restaurant when a gun battle broke out on the sidewalk outside. She dove under her table with her hands over her ears. Oh my God. Sorry. Until she heard the gunfire stop. Afterwards, she almost lost the lunch that she had just eaten when she saw the bodies lying on the street. Over the next few days, she was on buses that were routinely checked by someone dressed in military garb who would often demand toll fees from everyone on board before the vehicle was allowed to proceed. Shaking herself out of her reverie, she saw the bus she had been waiting on slide to a stop. Casually, she walked out from her hiding place and stepped onto the bus, handing the driver the money to cover her fare before taking a seat toward the back. Jane hunkered down in her seat, trying to go unnoticed on the crowded bus. If she stayed on this particular bus, it would take her to Cordoba. She would stay there until she could find a way to Penuela. A young woman in the seat next to her kept giving her curious looks. Usually others would glance away when she caught them looking at her, but this woman didn't. Jane was startled when she suddenly stood up, sliding into the seat next to her. Jane cast her a startled look, praying she wouldn't start flirting with her. It wouldn't be the first time a young woman had, and Jane had felt uncomfortable rebuffing the woman when it had happened. "You have family in Cordoba?" "No." Jane lowered her voice, trying to sound masculine. The woman was dark-haired and beautiful. Jane would never be able to compete with her in the beauty department, even when she was dressed as a woman in her tightest leather outfit. "My name is Karina." Jane remained quiet, hoping her silence would drive her away. Instead, she began talking about her family in Ciudad Valles before speaking of her own life. "I work in a bar in Cordoba." Jane wondered frantically why Karina kept divulging so much information about herself. The woman had to be aware of the danger she was putting herself in. "I deal with men every day. They have certain habits that are hard to hide." Jane stiffened, looking at the woman out of the corner of her eye. "Men do not cross their legs." Jane hastily uncrossed hers. "Why are you pretending to be a man?" Jane saw no malice in her face, only curiosity. "I thought it would be safer," Jane answered quietly, trying to keep her voice lowered so no one else could hear. "Possibly. On the other hand, it could be even more dangerous if another man wants to challenge you. I'd rather take my chances with a gun battle than be kidnapped and raped." Karina's eyes darkened. "I see you have been listening to all the gossip about Mexico in the United States." Jane felt ashamed of herself. She didn't want to assume the worst, but witnessing the captive women and her knowledge of Bailey's confinement had her on her guard. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It is dangerous. However, as long as you're cautious, you will be safe. If you're so concerned for your safety, why are you traveling alone and going to Cordoba?" Jane decided to be truthful. "I'm trying to find my sister. She recently came to Mexico to visit her husband's relatives in Peñuela and never returned home." "Maybe she doesn't want to." Karina's face had paled when Jane mentioned Peñuela. Jane shook her head. "Her last text message was to my father, saying her husband wanted them to stay longer, but she wanted to come home." "You are going to Peñuela?" "As soon as I can catch the next bus." "You know where she is in Peñuela?" "No. I only met her husband once, and we didn't talk much." "You can't go knocking on people's doors asking questions," Karina warned. "I know that. I thought I would ask around if anyone knew Raul's family, Silva." Actually, she had been so focused on trying to reach Peñuela safely that she hadn't given much thought to how she would find where her sister was living. Karina's face went white. She gripped Jane's arm tightly. "You can't do that," she hissed. "Why?" This time it was Karina's turn to remain silent. "Please tell me," Jane pleaded. "I have heard of the Silva family. They are very dangerous and involved in many things I do not want to know about. My cousin worked in the bar before I did. She met someone from the Silva organization and they became involved." Karina shuddered. "She moved to Peñuela to be with him and rarely sees her family anymore. They keep their women close." Jane already knew that piece of information. Bailey wouldn't have easily given up her pampered lifestyle in the United States unless she had been forced to. Jane's mind whirled as she tried to think of what her next step should be. "Where are you going to stay tonight? No bus will be leaving for Peñuela so late." "I don't know." "Stay with me. I think I may have an idea to help." Jane stared at her steadily, attempting to decide if she should trust the woman. Karina's tanned complexion was smooth and without blemish. Her dark eyes clear and straightforward, and the long mass of black hair had been swept away from her beautiful face. It was ultimately the concern in her expression for a stranger that had Jane deciding to trust her. "I'll stay the night and take the bus tomorrow. Thanks." After Karina nodded in response, they talked quietly as the bus drove. Karina told her more about her large family, as well as her fiancé, who was also waiting for her in Ciudad Valles. "He doesn't mind you being away?" "No, we are saving money to buy a home when we get married." Karina took her phone out of her pocket to show a picture of a handsome man standing next to her. It was obvious by the way they were staring into each other's eyes that they were very much in love. It was the same expression Jane had caught on Sex Pistols and Stud's face when they thought themselves unobserved. It was almost dark when the bus entered Cordoba, but there was enough light for Jane to see the city was much larger than she had envisioned. She got off the bus and walked toward Karina, trying to keep up with her fast pace. "I thought you said it wasn't as dangerous as I had heard," Jane puffed. It isn't until it gets dark." Jane gazed up at the rapidly darkening sky. "How much longer?" Oh, gosh. "Not far." Karina turned down one street, then another, the buildings getting further and further apart, and older as they passed. She made a right onto a street that was almost completely dark, the only light coming from a sign outside a small building. Karina pointed in relief. "That's it, come on." Jane's weariness returned, but she foolishly followed, telling herself everything would be fine. If Kilyamal were there, she would kick her ass for being so trusting. Karina didn't go to the front door, going instead to the back where she kicked a beer bottle out of their path that led to a flight of steps. Taking a key from her pocket, she opened the door. Jane took a hesitant step inside, instantly relieved when she saw the bright apartment. "It's very pretty," Jane complimented, staring at the bright red couch with the small coffee table sitting in front of it. It had a small kitchen with 2 stools sitting in front of the counter that was tiled in a myriad of bright colors. The couch pulls out into a bed. "I share the apartment with Teresa. We sleep in the bedroom." She pointed to an open doorway down a small hallway. "She's working downstairs in the bar tonight. I need to get changed and go down to help out. Will you be all right alone?" "Yes, I'll take a shower if you don't mind and get some sleep." "That sounds good. I'll be back after my shift." She went inside the bedroom and closed the door. Jane found a hiding place for her backpack with the gun inside before taking off her cap. Oh my God, these damn mosquitoes. Shit. Sorry. Where was I? Jane found a hiding place for her backpack with the gun inside before taking off her cap. She ran her fingers through her damp hair, feeling its filthiness. Although she was anxious to take a shower and wash the grime away, she wasn't thrilled about having to put her dirty clothes back on. "That sounds good. I'll be back after my shift." She went inside the bedroom and closed the door. Karina came out of the bedroom dressed in a loose black skirt and a bright pink t-shirt, packing a bundle of clothes in her hand. "I didn't know if you had anything to sleep in, so I brought you an extra gown of mine." She handed Jane the small gown that she was sure would reach the floor. Karina was much taller than her. "I need to go. I am already late." "Go ahead. I'll be fine," Jane assured her, trying to hide her uncertainty. Karina went to the front door. "If you hear a key in the door, don't be scared. Sometimes Teresa brings someone upstairs to the bedroom for a little while. I'll tell her to be quiet so she won't wake you." "Thanks." Jane didn't know what else to say. Her new friend simply nodded before going out the door, leaving her alone. Jane stood still for several minutes, merely staring at the closed door, wondering if she had lost her mind to trust someone she had just met. She really didn't have any other option at that point. She would get some sleep, then catch the bus to Peñuela in the morning. She went into the tiny bathroom, taking off her filthy clothes while the bath filled with water before getting in. She laid her head back as she soaked, letting the tension ease out of her shoulders. She was jerked awake when she heard the front door slam shut and voices coming from the living room. Jane almost slipped and fell out of the tub as she climbed out. Drying off, she heard them pass the bathroom and go inside the bedroom. She pulled on the nightgown Karina had left her and then left the bathroom to go back to the living room. The couch was easily pulled out into a bed, already made up. Thankfully, she climbed underneath the covers and turned out the lights, trying not to listen to the sounds of the bed and the female moans coming from the bedroom. Jane knew her cheeks were bright red in the darkness of the room. It took several minutes before exhaustion had her dozing off again. If her friends could see her right then, they would rip her a new one for placing herself in such a predicament. She missed them so badly, even though she told herself she hadn't been gone for that long. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she would find Bailey tomorrow. get them to the closest airport, and then get out of Mexico as fast as they could. If all went well, she would be home before her friends became really pissed. They didn't react well when they became angry. Ain't that the damn truth?